Hello, everyone. For the foreseeable future, at least through the basketball season, my plan is to try to record one of these video blogs. Everyone calls them vlogs. One of these video blogs once every maybe other week to try to go through whether it be game footage or something that has come up during the course of the last couple of weeks in the association, something that we're seeing a lot of, or the feedback that I'm hearing from officials that might indicate that we need to look deeply into some particular aspect of what we're seeing during the season. If teams are perpetually showing us one issue or another. So my goal with these isn't to put my face on a video screen and have you guys stare at it for 10, 15 minutes. What I'm really looking to do is using this as a training tool to talk about some of the higher level issues as we go along. So I think having kind of this fluid discussion, this fluid vlog can be beneficial for the entire association. So one of the things, or I should say the first thing that I wanted to talk about was something that we've already had come up a couple of times in some pretty significant cases during the middle school season. So I'm recording this on November 21st of 2021. The high school season hasn't started yet, but the middle school season has. And we've had, as I mentioned, a couple of issues already with irate coaches getting out of hand. There's even been an instance where a coach has been terminated because of their behavior during a game, and it permeates all levels. I don't know how many of you watched or came to the meeting at Garber last week that had where we hosted Jason Wildy and BJ Weaver, two college coaches who are also members of our association. They talked about how as you move up each level, there is less and less conflict with coaches. The conflict that does occur tends to be very directed, very educated, very knowledgeable. But I think everyone can think of a number of coaches at the high school level or at the middle school level who aren't quite as educated or aren't quite as knowledgeable. And I think we have to be ready to have those interactions when we as officials tend to know the rule and the actual letter of the law better than coaches do. And I don't say that to put officials on a pedestal. What I'm really looking at is the likelihood that a coach gets into the nuts and bolts of the rules book and the case book more than an official does. And my hope is the official gets into the rule book or the case book more than the coach does organically, because coaches need to coach and officials need to officiate. And we've said that many times before. So some of the time, our role is teaching coaches about what we see on the floor and interpreting that action based on the rule book and the case book. Since we've already had a couple of issues with officials acting out, I thought it would be appropriate right before we hit the basketball season to cover something that I already covered, excuse me, in the second training meeting, the November 3rd meeting in Standish Sterling, but it has a tendency to resonate, excuse me. The other thing too is we've talked about the importance of attracting and retaining new officials. And the conflict with coaches and the acting out of coaches is the number one reason that we're losing new officials. I don't care whether they're young, old, new officials have a learning curve that they need to go through when it comes to conflict with coaches. It's our duty as if you're a veteran official, and by veteran official, I mean an official who's worked maybe 5 years or more, even more so if you've worked at the varsity high school level. But it's on us as veteran officials to help that learning curve not be filled with conflict, inappropriate behavior by coaches and players. We need to step up, we need to step forward, and we need to help mentor newer officials. And I know everyone's probably tired of hearing it, but I think actions that have occurred just in the past week or two alone have made it very clear that we still have a long way to go. I have a lot of respect for Bruce and Jason and Scott and Ed, because they're on the front lines fighting this battle with athletic directors and school administrators every day. Whenever we learn of an issue, those four guys step forward and take it upon themselves to try to engage people at the school level to make sure inappropriate behavior doesn't perpetuate itself. So again, to those guys, I very much appreciate it. Lee Morgan would also be in that category as the assigner of the Tri-Valley Conference. It's not easy. I've been in a car with Lee, with Scott, with Jason, with Ed after games, driving home, and their cell phones are constantly going off. So I appreciate what they do. I appreciate that they stand behind their officials. And I think the MHSAA appreciates what we as an association are trying to do to correct behavior, inappropriate behavior from coaches and players. But to that end, it's also on us as officials to have some of the tools in our tool belt when we walk on the floor. Earlier today, I was looking at some officiating content online, and I came across an article. It was on I forget what the name of the website was, but it was a website meant specifically for basketball coaches. And the title of the article was How to Manipulate Officials to Make Every Call Your Way. And the actual content of the article itself was pretty decent in terms of how a coach should positively interact with an official. But again, if you were to just read the title of the article, How to Manipulate an Official, obviously that would give you bad vibes. But reading the article itself, it was talking about building a rapport with an official. Don't be cocky with an official. Don't be arrogant with an official. Don't talk back to an official. Treat your players how to act properly with officials. So again, the content of the article wasn't bad. It was just the title of the article that struck a chord with me. And I thought, if this type of content is online and it's directed right at coaches, not saying any of the coaches that we work with have read the article, but I'm sure there have been instances where discussion has been had among coaches about how to manipulate officials, specifically younger officials that they haven't interacted with before. So I bring this presentation forward because, unfortunately, I thought that I could get the PowerPoint presentation to work while I was presenting, but it was obvious that I didn't when we were at Standish. So only about 30 people had eyes on the actual PowerPoint presentation. And I'm not going to go through the whole thing, but what I'd like to do is specifically bring up this slide from my presentation, which is embracing the value of conflict. Number one, I think it's important for us to always be active listeners. Now, I don't mean that we should have rabbit ears or listen to everything a coach is trying to say to us. But if they're presenting it in a manner that is appropriate, quiet, and calm, there's nothing wrong with listening to what a coach has to say. And if we continue to actively listen, I think it puts us in a better position to strengthen that rapport with a coach during the game, so that if something starts to brew between players, we can go to a coach and say, Coach, I'm having trouble with number 35. They're getting a little bit aggressive with their elbows in the post. Would you have a conversation with them before we have to escalate into a violation or a foul? But that rapport starts with active listening on our parts. The second point here, it forces us to use correct language provided to us by the rules book and the case book. Getting into the rules book, getting into the case book, learning the definitions, learning the terminology, learning the buzzwords, goes back to the point I made a few minutes ago. We as officials have to be the most knowledgeable people in any gym on the rules of the game. There's no excuse for not being the most knowledgeable people when it comes to rules. And sometimes we have to be the teachers for coaches and players, and that's okay. It's better than being asked a question and then staring at a coach with a deer in the headlights look because you don't know the terminology and the verbiage of the rules. Learn the definitions that are in the rules book, because that will help you go a long way, especially when you're in a high intensity situation. 2 minutes left to go in the game, tied game, 50-50 block charge. Emotions are going to be running high in the gym. Coach is going to present you, the coach that didn't get the call their way is going to present you with a question, hopefully with a question. Again, statements are one thing that we don't answer. Questions are something that we do answer as long as they're presented to us calmly. But if that coach is asking you a question and your only response is, we're going with what I called, that's not acceptable as an official. If they're legitimately asking you a question and doing so in a straightforward, calm, reserved manner, we as officials deserve to give, or we as officials should give that coach at least some explanation about why we made the call that we did, versus just saying, that's my call, we're going with it. Especially on a block charge, legal guarding position. Not just saying, coach, the defender had legal guarding position, but saying, coach, the defender had legal guarding position. Both feet and shoulders were pointed towards the ball handler. Once legal guarding position is obtained, that defender can move laterally. That's why I called the player control foul. Requires us to be the entity that takes a deep breath and acts with patience. Going back to that last example, we have to be the calmest, most put together people in the gym, which is tough because we are always, or I should say, we are usually the entity that is getting yelled at, getting screamed at, being questioned. So it's not easy to take a deep breath and act with patience, and I understand that. But again, if you're building that rapport with a coach during the game, before the game, during the game, and I'm not talking about shaking hands for 3 minutes, laughing, smiling, telling jokes, asking that coach how their kids are. That's not building a rapport, okay? Building a rapport is, again, being straightforward, telling the coach that you're going to give 100% and that your expectations for them as coaches are to allow you to officiate the game. If they have a question, feel free to ask it. But we are only going to answer questions during the game. You take a very professional approach with your body language, your pattern of speech, and how you present yourself. That's going to be what builds rapport with the coach before the game and during the game. And that will allow you the opportunity to take a deep breath and act with patience, because you've given that coach an opportunity to act with more civility. And hopefully that carries over into those high pressure, high intensity situations. Finally, understanding that we as officials are not going to be right 100% of the time. Now, we are going to make mistakes. And in very, very, very sparing situations, being willing to admit a call was less than optimal to a coach. But again, it has to be the right situation. It has to be the right coach. You have to have the right rapport. And you have to be ready for it to go sideways. Again, I'm not sure how many of you watched the video from the Standish meeting, but we had an official in the room who pointed out that he used this exact strategy, identifying that he made a mistake, he blew a call, and his expectation, because he knew the coach and had worked with the coach before, was that the coach was going to accept that he made a wrong call and allow the official to continue on with the game. The official was trying to extend an olive branch. Well, unfortunately, the coach very loudly pointed out that the official had just told him that he had made an incorrect call. So now the situation has turned from what the official's expectations were to what the actual outcome was. So you have to be ready. If you're going to tell a coach that you might not have made your best call of the game, you have to be ready for that coach to react. And that's why you want to use this tactic very sparingly, very sparingly. 1 or 2 times a season with the right coach, a coach that, if you haven't worked at least 10 games for that particular coach, I wouldn't even think about using that method. The other thing that I wanted to bring up, excuse me, professionalism from the moment you get out of your car to the moment you return to your vehicle after the game is over. A lot of times we as officials change in a locker room that is either shared with one of the 2 teams that are playing in that night's game, or we're in a room that's adjacent to a locker room, or we're in a room that's adjacent to maybe a coach's office. Maybe we're in the coach's office. One of the things to keep in mind is you want to interact with other coaches, with other officials when you're doing your pregame, when you're just sitting around getting changed, whatever the case may be. You always want to have a conversation with the overriding thought that you're being recorded, someone hears you, whatever the case may be. Because even the most subtle conversations can oftentimes be overheard by players, coaches, school officials, ADs, whoever. But we have to be cognizant of the fact that it's very likely that someone could hear our conversations. So we're in the locker room before the game, we're talking pre-game, and I might pop off to the crew that last time I was at this game, this coach was absolutely terrible. He was running around, he was screaming, he was causing all kind of conflicts, he was acting like an idiot. I say those words, who might be in the next room? Who might be hearing? Who might be able to hear something through a vent in the ceiling? From the time we get out of our car to the time we get back into our car, the microphones and the videos are turned on. And we are under a microscope, we are under a magnifying glass, whatever euphemism you want to use. But we have to remember that professionalism starts with us. And if we're not professional, how can we expect coaches and players and spectators to be professional? It's on us to set the tone. With that being said, it kind of takes me to my last point here. My job is not to appease coaches, it's to call the game. That's not the right mentality to have. Okay. To the note on my last slide here. We need players and coaches as much as coaches and players need us. We never want to take officiating for granted. And while I understand that appeasing coaches isn't the right terminology to use, again, our coaches a lot of times are our eyes and ears. And there's many games where I've had to rely on a coach to step forward and take charge with a particular player, because I don't want to eject players. I don't want to give technical fouls to players. I don't want to foul players out of a game. That's not why I'm there. I'm there to try to stay in the background as much as possible, make the calls that need to be made, and not have anyone notice that I was officiating the game. And a lot of times, again, building that rapport with a coach, being straightforward and honest, and trying to get that coach to understand that you are not there to ensure that one team wins and one team loses. We don't get paid any differently based on who wins and loses. So the reality of the situation is, yes, we are there to officiate the game. That is correct. And our job is not to appease coaches. But there's a way in which we can present that aura, that body language, that professionalism from the time we step in the gym till the time that we leave. One last thing that I wanted to bring up, and then we can end the recording. I am a big fan of crownrefs.com, CROWNREFS, crownrefs.com. They put a lot of good content out. I'm not sure if they still have their podcast or not, but they have. They've had a podcast in the past. Unfortunately, I got a new phone and I didn't add them back in, but I always go to their website looking for articles. And this article that I have up right now, red dot equals danger zone. So the concept here is, think of communicating with coaches in a straight line, and keeping your communication with coaches on this straight line. So you can see here the first interaction with a coach, the first what could be considered negative interaction with a coach during a game. Come on, ref, you got to call it both ways. Okay. Our job is to take control of the game, take control of the conversation, and bring it back to this red dot mentality. Coach, I hear you. I had a foul on number 33. She hit her on the shooter's elbow going up. Okay. That's what we owe a coach in that situation. If even that. But again, early in a game, I might give a coach a little leeway to try to build rapport, to give him or her the chance to build that rapport along with me. But if they escalate to the second point, that's a travel. What are you looking at? Again, it's on us to try to bring it back to the red dot. Coach, if you have a question, I'm approachable, but I can't have you chirping the entire game. Now, I probably wouldn't use the term chirping. I would say, Coach, if you have a question, I'm approachable, but I can't answer statements. Okay. Later on in the game, the coach wants to escalate again. Come on, ref, you got to call it both ways. Bringing it back to the red dot, trying to keep the game flowing on a straight line. Coach, that's enough. I've met with you 2 times already. This is not how the game is going to go. If you have a question, I can help answer during a timeout. Be willing to work with a coach until the coach makes it valueless for you to work with them. A really good point down here. Your goal should be to ensure the entire game flows on a straight line. If things get hostile and coach is not happy, the dot moves off the straight line. Your goal should be to get that dot right back on track on the straight line. This straight line is the mentality that I personally use to officiate, and I hope other officials can understand it and adopt it. Another good point they make in this article: take care of this early in the game and don't let it linger. We're here to make decisions on the court, not have small talk and at-length conversations. And then finally down here, probably the best takeaway point in all of this: we dictate the terms of the dialogue. We dictate when we have encounters and conversations and how it's going to be communicated. Otherwise, coaches are going to take control and dictate how the game will go in terms of communication. And we all know that coach behavior has a large impact on player behavior and spectator behavior. We have to get comfortable with taking care of business when we need to. I do not care if any one coach that I work with likes me or wants to be friends with me or wants to go out for dinner after a game. I could care less. It doesn't matter to me. Again, our job is to oversee and manage the game, adjudicate penalties when necessary, and try to have as little impact on the actual game being played as possible. And hopefully, with the right communication tools, we can move the needle in the right direction, keep coaches under control, build rapport across the association, and continue to be looked at as one of the best associations in the state of Michigan. Have a good day, everyone.